Hello and welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. If you're a movie fan of any size, shape or hue, hit the subscribe button. We do trailer reactions, we do movie reviews, and if we can speak straight, we also, when the news flow starts to come, we also do the Weekly Rushes, which is coming back in November. This is a trailer reaction to a film called The Zone of Interest, and this really is a film of massive interest to me because this is directed by a director called Jonathan Glazer. Now, Jonathan Glazer did that infamous film, notorious film, the gangster crime pick that stands head and shoulders and tubby Ray Winston belly ahead above other crime movies, Sexy Beast, in which, of course, there was Ray Winston, Ben Kingsley, in the most astonishing performance ever. I think it was even nominated for an Oscar, and the inimitable Ian McShane. It was a sensational piece of character study, male toxic masculinity, but it was just head and shoulders above any other kind of crime movie. And then it was many years later, he made a film called Under the Skin. And it's essentially about Scarlett Johansson being an alien of sorts, cruising the streets of Glasgow, picking up men, and essentially dispatching with them in the most sticky, awful, weird sort of ways. An incredibly atmospheric film, incredibly chilling, incredibly creepy, and in its dealing with kind of sexuality and all that kind of stuff, left just a really uncomfortable taste. It was less about what you saw as what was inferred and how it made you feel. It's a very clever piece of filmmaking, and I think it's possibly one of my top 10 films of all times. Massively helped by the fact that it had a soundtrack by Mika Levy, and as I understand it, Mika Levy has also done the soundtrack to this new film. Now, The Zone of Interest is loosely based on a book by Martin Amis. It is very loosely based on. And what's interesting about this film is it's a Holocaust film. It's a film about the awfulness of World War II and the Nazi atrocities. But it takes, or it approaches its subject matter in an incredibly different, counterintuitive and indirect way. And by all accounts, it did well at the Cannes Film Festival. By all accounts, it manages to portray the Holocaust at its most grisliest and most challenging and most discomforting and disquieting and most upsetting, in a sense, because it doesn't choose at all to focus on what happens in Auschwitz. Instead, and think about this, it chooses to focus essentially on the ordinariness, the everydayness, the kind of ability to live, in inverted commas, a normal family life of one of the key perpetrators of the Holocaust. So it tells essentially the chilling real-life story of the German SS officer Rudolf Höss and his wife, who essentially raised their children in a farmhouse in the shadows of and in listening distance of the concentration camp, Auschwitz. I think this is going to be an incredibly tough watch, but not in the most obvious of fashions. And I think that's what's quite clever. I think it's one of the problems with massive historic events and see moments of such atrocity and awfulness, such blemishes on humanity and history, is that sometimes the scale of the evil is so enormous to comprehend that we can't look at it, or we choose to not forget it, but partition it and put it to one side. Whereas, sometimes it's about finding how can we approach this in a completely different way. And I think it sounds like Jonathan Glazer might have found that way. Wow. And if you think about this film, I mean, I wonder whether the filmmakers, Jonathan Glazer, A24, decided to release this trailer maybe sooner. I don't know, given everything, the awfulness of what's happened to Israel, the awfulness of what's now happening to Gaza, the ways in which there are horrendous parallels on both sides of the conflict that kind of, unfortunately, trickle back to this origin point in World War II. The suburban ordinariness of a German family officer and his wife and his children, the sort of neat, ordered, everyday lifeness of it, whilst in the background you just saw there, didn't you, the kind of the turrets, you saw the barbed wire to the back of the house. Does the house literally abut the actual camp, Auschwitz? You've got the soundtrack, and you've got, even in the intertitles there, sort of suggesting, you know, there's a narrative for this family of wanting to survive, wanting the best for his children. If they're treating something like the atrocities that are happening next door with such everyday sort of ordinary, as such an everyday ordinary event, is there going to be, I think what this film's going to be, what's going to be interesting about this film is the parallels it encourages us to look at in terms of how we all choose to ignore things after, if you like, the intensity and heat of press coverage. I mean, a classic case is the Israel-Palestine scenario now. If you look at how it's fading or just drifting slightly lower down the news agenda, it's the ways in which we all collectively, and in so many different walks of life, of our lives, and in different ways, we choose to just concentrate on what works in our lives rather than what the implications are of what's going on massively around us in terms of the treatment of others. So I think whilst this is obviously going to be coming from a strongly, I think Jonathan Glazer's Jewish, Jewish perspective in terms of the awfulness of the Holocaust, I think what's going to be powerful about this film is how it's going to speak to or speak for many, many other countless conflicts and acts of aggression and hostility and prejudice around the world that become so intense and so destructive, and yet we get to a point, those of us around it, of just turning the other cheek and looking away and forgetting and becoming immune to the horrors of what are actually going on because we feel helpless or we feel we can't do anything. So, you know, a very simple idea that potentially, on one hand, you think if they've removed the actual drama, becomes even more dramatic, doesn't it? It's that classic thing that the greatest filmmakers have always engaged in, which is don't show the monster. And this is it on a grand scale. Don't show the monster. And in many regards, the implications of what that monstrosity are or is become infinitely more powerful. Wow.